Okay, let's unleash the hidden potential in this image. We'll start by cleaning up the background. This portrait wasn't photographed in a studio, it was done in the open ambient lighting. And so we don't have a lot of drama from the directional lighting we would have used in a studio. But we can actually increase the localized contrast and drama in post-production. First, however, let's go about cleaning that background. And to do this, we'll use the Dodge tool, just behind the sponge tool in the tools panel there. Okay, let's select highlights as the range, and we'll use an exposure of around about 10%. Okay, now we're using a large soft brush to do this, and we're just going to paint over some of the areas in order to increase that. We're working a little bit slowly here, so I'll raise the exposure to around about 20% or so to work a little bit quicker. Now it might take several strokes to clean that tone, and it doesn't really matter if you hit the edge of the hat there, because those are midtones and they're going to be protected from this dodging procedure here. Now as we come down the fine detail around the beard and the background is slightly less dark, then we can drop that exposure to my original 10% and just clean up that tone nicely. Now we're pulling back to white as if this was a nice studio background in a nice white backdrop that photographers would use in the studio, because we're going to end up with a picture that actually looks like it was photographed in all of the high drama of studio lighting. Okay, now there's a couple of things that are starting to annoy me just around the edge of the hat. There's a few woolen bobbles coming off the hat, and I find them slightly distracting, so I'm just going to remove those using the spot healing brush tool there. And in the options bar, we've got the new content aware option check there. Okay, let's just come in, and we're going to use a reasonably small brush here. Let's just increase that a little bit, and we're going to come in and just spot those few elements right on the edge there, so they're not going to be annoying anyone. And we've got a couple of spots also that are just starting to annoy me on the nose now, and there they are, gone. Okay, now we're set to start the project in earnest, and we'll do that by duplicating the background layer. We'll use the keyboard shortcut. For a PC that would be Control J, for a Mac that would be Command J, in order to duplicate that background layer. Now we're going to remove the color from this layer, and we can do that by going to Enhance, Adjust Color, and Remove Color. That's Command Shift U on a Mac, Control Shift U on a PC, and I'll just call this one BW for black and white. Okay, now let's duplicate this layer, Command J, Control J on a PC, and we're going to rename this one Blur. Now although we're going to create some very sharp detail when we finish up in this image, I do want to smooth the tones in this image so I can start modeling the shape and give more depth to this image. So we're going to use a slightly surprising tool when we're aiming to end up with sharp detail. We're going to use the Gaussian blur. We're going to come up to Filter, Blur, and then come across to Gaussian blur. Now we're going to use quite a heavy radius here, not so heavy that we actually lose the shape of the face here, and not so light that we can't actually smooth those tones out. We're going to go somewhere in between, and this is going to actually, the precise amount is going to vary depending on the resolution of the image you're working with. Here in this instance I'm working for around about 15 pixels, and I'll commit that change to the file. Now we're going to mix this smooth tone back into the underlying tones, and to do that we're going to actually use one of the blend modes, and this time we're going to use the multiply blend mode. So we're getting some smoother tones, but it's getting a little bit dark now, so we're going to try and recover that with another blend mode attached to an adjustment layer. We're going to pick up a levels adjustment, and then set the blend mode of this layer to one of the lightning blend modes. We're going to use screen, and that's going to pull back the midtones and highlights. If we're losing some of the shadow detail, then we can actually come and put in a levels adjustment layer underneath this one in the screen mode. Just to show you that, we could actually click on the blur, come in with another levels adjustment layer, Now we're going to want to clip this to the layer underneath, because we only want to affect the blur pixels rather than the underlying black and white pixels. Now there is a little icon in the bottom of the levels dialog now to clip this adjustment layer, and as you can see there, it just indents slightly, so it's clipped. So we're only affecting the pixels on the layer underneath and no further. Okay, now if we drag the output level slider to the right, we can just bring back some of the detail in those areas there. Okay, now let's press forward and see what else we can do to increase the drama inside of this image. If we do need to increase mid-tone contrast, or even rescue some of the shadow tones if they have gone a little bit dark, we can also try an alternate technique to the one I just showed you here. And in order to do that, we need to stamp the visible elements to a new layer. So we're going to go Command Option Shift E. That would be Control Alt Shift E on a PC, and then we're going to come to the Enhance menu, roll down to Adjust Lighting, and across to Shadows Highlights. And we're not going to want to lighten the shadows that much, so we'll just wind this back because we have already done some lightening using that second levels adjustment layer, but we can actually use this mid-tone contrast slider to wind up and give more depth to the image, and there we're giving some nice character into this image now, and we'll select OK to apply those changes. Just to show you how far we've come, I'll just hold down the Alt or Option key and click on the visibility icon of that black-white layer before we start applying these tonal adjustments, and you'll see how much extra depth we've actually worked into that file. Okay, just a before and after once again. There's the before, quite flat really, and then just Option clicking that visibility icon again, or Alt clicking, switches all of the layers back on so we can see the after. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to actually bring down the brightness of this backdrop now. So we're going to create a vignette. Now I'll just rename some of these layers because we've got quite a few already kicking in. So this one was the Shadow Highlights layer. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to pick up another adjustment layer called Gradient. Okay, now it's important before we pick up this gradient, I'll just cancel this out to show you this feature, we actually need to make sure that we've got the black-white option set as the default foreground background colors before we go into this adjustment feature. Okay, now we'll come into the gradient, and instead of the linear, the default linear option, we're going to switch to radial. Okay, now, and it's also important that if we're going to darken the edges, that we also hit the reverse option. And we're going to scale this up because it's just a more of a spotlight appearance at the moment. So we're just going to click on that and drag that all the way over to the right hand side for 150%. Okay, now we can actually swivel the radius or the angle of this gradient by just turning that around if necessary, so we can create more of an elliptical vignette. It's not quite cleared from the face in its entirety, so we're going to go and click on the gradient itself and then come and drag this white stop on the gradient here and drag that in towards the left hand side, and as you can see we can push that gradient further back towards the edge. We can also come into the image itself once we've applied this adjustment and then click and drag the gradient or the radial gradient around so we can feature exactly where we want this spotlight effect appearing on the face. And so I'm just going to center it slightly higher and to the left. Okay, so we've got that gradient applied, and that's darkening down the background really quite nicely now. These smooth gradients, however, are quite risky when we're pushing them over very smooth flat tone. They can step or band either on screen or in print, and so in order to reduce the risk of this stepping, we're just going to add a small amount of noise in this area. So we're going to click on the Create a New Layer icon, and let's just go back. I'll just Command Z because I'm actually going to hold down the Alt Option key in order to get to some of these extra features that I'm looking for. So holding down the Alt Option key and then click on the Create a New Layer icon, and we're going to title this one Grain. and we're going to set the mode of this one to overlay, which is one of the contrast blend modes, and we're also going to check the fill with overlay neutral color 50% grey, and then select OK. Now we won't see any changes at the moment because that 50% grey is invisible, or neutral as Adobe calls it, and so but when we apply grain or noise or texture to this layer, this texture is going to flow through. Now I'm only going to want to apply the texture to the gradient itself, so I could either mask that or just make a selection of the background area. So to do that, I'll just temporarily switch off the gradient fill layer and pick up either the magic wand tool or the quick selection tool, and we'll just drag down that. Now if we're working with either of these tools, it's very important that we have the sample all layers option selected, so that Photoshop can actually see what it is we're trying to select here. And I'll just select that upper right hand corner. I need to hold down the Option or Alt key and then click and remove a portion of that hat from that selection. Okay, now I've got the area that I actually want to apply the grain to. I can switch back that gradient fill back on, and then come to the filter menu, noise, and add noise. And typically I'm going to add quite a lot of texture to here to try and replicate some of the texture or grittiness in the file itself. So I'm using quite a high amount, 7%, a Gaussian, and monochromatic, and then we're selecting OK. Now that I've finished with that selection, I can go back to the select menu and choose deselect. And now we've got that texture, that lovely texture flowing through that background there. Now for most people this amount of extra drama would suffice. Again, I'll just show you before and after of the original flat file, and this is the treated version. We can however push this much further if we wanted to, and I'm going to show you a couple of the ways we can do that. Okay, let's stamp the visible elements into a new layer. If you remember the keyboard shortcut for this, Command Option Shift E on a Mac, and that would be Control Alt Shift E on a PC. And we're going to call this one High Pass after the filter we're about to use on it. Okay, now we're going to set this to one of the contrast blend modes. So we'll start with soft light or overlay. Okay, I'll start with the one with the least amount of localized contrast, soft light, and then we can crank it up from there. Okay, then let's come into the filter menu, come all the way down to other, and across to high pass. And in order to give a lot of depth to this file, if we use a very low amount, we'll simply be serving to sharpen this file, and this is often used as an alternative to the unsharp mask. But we're actually going to build in depth. If I just do that, you'll see that we're actually making the image even less flat and even more, giving it more depth and more apparent detail. Now there's no specific amount here. You can just roll this backwards and forwards looking for the best depth to this image, and it's somewhere around about that 50 pixel radius mark there, and we'll select OK. Now if that was a little bit aggressive for you, we could wind the opacity back and just apply that in a smaller portion there, maybe 50-60%. If that's not enough and you want to go even further, you can move from soft light into overlay mode, and that gives in even more contrast there. And if I was using the overlay mode, I would certainly want to bring that back perhaps to 60% or so. Okay, and just to show you before and after that high pass, okay, just if you didn't think there could be any possible more drama applied, and there it comes in now, snapping in and giving even more depth and contrast and detail to this image. And we'll probably be best off now if we finish this image off with some sharpening, so we can recover some of the detail that was softened up by that original Gaussian blur. Remember that Gaussian blur isn't too destructive because it was actually applied in a blend mode, the multiply blend mode, so we still had the underlying detail flowing through that Gaussian blur. Okay, one more time. We're going to do that stamp visible keyboard shortcut, Command Option Shift E on a Mac, Control Alt Shift E on a PC, and we're going to rename this one the Sharpen layer, and we're going to put the blend mode to luminosity. And it's not actually a requirement if we're going to stay in black and white to use the luminosity blend mode, but if we want to switch off the underlying layers and recover the color, then the luminosity blend mode will serve us well if we decide to do that. Okay, let's come in with the to the enhance menu. Now if this was a very low ISO digital image, we would use the adjust sharpness perhaps. This has actually been captured using a professional medium format film camera, and so there is a small amount of film grain there that I don't want to sharpen, so I'm going to lean towards the unsharp mask instead of the adjust sharpness here to finish this project off. And I'm going to zoom in a couple of times. I'm going to use the command spacebar and then click a couple of times in order to zoom in. I want a clean magnification, possibly around about 50%, so I can see how much detail we're getting into this image. And as you can see, we're getting a lot of extra detail now. If I click on and off the preview, you're going to see that we're going from reasonably soft into razor sharp now. Now I am raising that threshold because there is some grain that I don't want to sharpen, and perhaps the 195 is a little bit too aggressive, and also we could wind the radius back a fraction until I get the strands on that beard at just the right amount of sharpness. And I'm going to go for around about 0.8, around about 170% there, and select OK. And we'll zoom out a couple of times, command minus or control minus, just to come back down to 25%, so we get a good clean magnification for evaluating this file. Okay, so let's just do a couple of before and afters for the very last time. Again, on the black and white adjustment layer, holding down the Option or Alt key, clicking on and off, and there's the original flat black and white file. Or we can Option click or Alt click on the original background to see the color. Now if we want the best of both worlds, if we want the increased drama and tonality of what we've just been doing, but we want the color to come back, then you can switch off every other layer except the top and bottom layers. And to show you that, I'll just switch them all off, and there we're coming in with the color. Okay, and we're switching off the high pass, and now we're just left with the color and the increased drama of the tonality. So I'm just going to wind that color back. It just looks a little bit strange with so much color there. Okay, and like so. Now we're actually losing that that vignette, so I might want to at this stage just to switch that one back on to bring that one and also the grain there. Okay, so there we go. We've got a coloured version, but with the increased drama of that sharpened layer coming in and giving us more depth and localized contrast.